Hello, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my 5 best and worst things about a New Zealand road trip. So a little background about me, I lived in Auckland, New Zealand for 5 months while I was studying abroad in 2017, and then I came back to New Zealand in 2018 to see more of the country and stuff like that, and I came back for 1 month, and a lot of that time I was living out of a van or just driving around the country. So even when I was studying abroad for 5 months, I did a lot of road trips just for the weekend or during my semester break and stuff like that. So I did a lot of road trips the first time, and then obviously the second time was very mainly focused on road trips as well. So I really think that seeing the country by car is one of the best ways to see it, because it's a relatively small country, but it's very, very diverse. So instead of flying everywhere where you might miss a lot of the things along the way, it's really nice to drive because a lot of the scenery that you pass by is like part of the whole experience. So that being said, let's just get right into the video. The first good thing about a New Zealand road trip is the amazing views that you'll see and the animals that you'll see, and pretty much just all the scenery that comes with doing a road trip in general. So New Zealand is made up of the North Island and the South Island. The North Island is typically more subtropical up north where Auckland is, and Northland, the Bay of Islands, stuff like that. And then there's a mid-region where there's a lot of waterfalls and springs and geysers, and obviously New Zealand is like 2 islands, so pretty much all around the country there's beautiful beaches, black sand beaches, a lot of volcanic activity, both active and dormant, and the South Island has a lot of really beautiful snowy mountains and glacier lakes. And New Zealand is really known for its geothermal activity, so there's all these beautiful blue lakes, green lakes, and stuff like that, and just all the most amazing views. So there's a ton of sheep, but also other wildlife. You'll see a lot of hawks in the sky when you're driving. One thing that we always do when we do road trips is we count to see how many hawks we'll see, because in one day you can see 10, 20, 30 depending on how long you drive for and what region you're in. So basically I think if you want to go on a really scenic road trip, then New Zealand is the place for you. Unfortunately, one of the worst things about a New Zealand road trip is that if you're not used to driving, like if it's your first time driving in general, well, one, the roads are on the left, which isn't a bad thing, but I'm just saying if you're not used to driving, then to begin with, it's already weird, because if you're used to driving on the right and then you have to drive on the left, that's going to be weird. But one of the things specifically about New Zealand is there's a lot of narrow, windy roads. So there's a lot of unfamiliar things about the roads, and especially because it's a new country, you're driving roads you've never driven before, and there's a lot of different traffic rules, like one-way bridges. There's a lot of one-way bridges, and basically that's like you're driving obviously on a 2-lane road, so like you're on the left and people are coming towards you on the right. So one side will have the right of way. So if you have the right of way, then you can just go straight along the bridge. But if you don't have the right of way, like if a car is coming towards you on the bridge, then you have to stop and wait there. Obviously, if you're from New Zealand, that's not weird to you or anything, but like I had never really seen a one-way bridge before, so driving on those can kind of be scary, because if you're driving on that road and you feel like a car is going to come towards you or something, that's scary. And sometimes they're really long, so one time I started driving, but then there was a car coming and I didn't have the right of way, so I had to back up, and that doesn't usually happen, but it's still kind of scary, so that's one thing to look out for when you're on these road trips. The second best thing I think about a New Zealand road trip is that it's really peaceful. So New Zealand's population is pretty small, so for a lot of New Zealand, like once you leave the cities, you can be driving and you're the only driver for many hours, and it's just kind of nice because you're the only one on the road, and you can see like obviously all these beautiful views, like lots of green landscapes and stuff like that. If you've seen The Lord of the Rings, New Zealand was where The Lord of the Rings was filmed, so it's like you're driving through the Shire or whatever. Driving at sunset is really beautiful because the whole sky is like pink and purple and all that stuff, and if you're the only driver on the road, it's pretty peaceful. You feel this real sort of like pioneer vibe almost because you're the only one on the road. The downside of that, or the flip side, is the second worst thing about a New Zealand road trip, and that is the lack of fuel stops. So if you don't have a full gas tank and you're just driving kind of in the middle of nowhere, which happens a lot in the South Island, sometimes you'll come to a pit stop and there will be no fuel left, or they're out of order for some reason, or there's no one there, or it's closed. And that happened to us a couple of times in the South Island, where we weren't like completely empty, but maybe had like less than a quarter tank full, and we really needed to get gas, but the nearest gas station was closed, and then the other one didn't have the type of fuel that our car needed. Basically, always fill up your fuel at the nearest city before you leave the city, because once you leave the city, the stops in between cities can be very infrequent. So yeah, just make sure that you have fuel so you're not stuck somewhere with no service and no fuel. So the third best thing about a New Zealand road trip ties along with the fact that there's not always drivers on the road with you, and sometimes you're the only driver, and that is that there's a lot of roundabouts or rotaries instead of stop signs or traffic lights. And this isn't that big a deal, and I guess depending on your perspective you could think that it's a bad thing as well, but I hate going to a traffic light and there's no one coming, and it's just like, why am I waiting at a red light when there's no one there? So the good thing about roundabouts is that like you just decide when to go based on the traffic flow, so it's easier to self-regulate. This is only possible obviously because the roads aren't as trafficy, and obviously in the city there's a lot of traffic lights and stuff like that, but there's a lot of roundabouts just on the highways through the country, and that's really nice because you can set your own pace in driving. So the third worst thing about New Zealand road trips in my opinion is that a lot of times with road trips you are camping out or staying at a campground or spending a lot of time just in the middle of nowhere. And so obviously if you're in the middle of nowhere, then there's going to be no cell service. So this happened a lot to us because when we were living in a van, we always stayed in campgrounds, which were down like 5-mile long roads that were unpaved and just in the middle of nowhere in very scenic places, but not near really civilization at all. So we didn't have service any of those times, and that could be kind of scary like some nights, because when we went it was the off season for camping, so there weren't always other cars with us. So when we were bored or wanted to contact people, it's like we couldn't because there was no cell service. So that can obviously be a good thing too if you're camping and you want to disconnect from the world, but to me it is always nice to have the option to contact people if you want. But sometimes be aware, depending on the campsite, there may not be any cell service. The fourth best thing about driving in New Zealand is how well marked the roads are. So because there wasn't always cell service, we didn't always have access to a GPS, but that was totally fine because as long as you have a map or a general sense of where you're going, the roads are just so well marked that it's pretty impossible to get lost. One of the best things about a road trip in general is that you can go at your own pace, and if you see something that interests you, you can just stop whatever plans that you might have had and just go do something that you spontaneously saw and thought was cool. And because the roads are so well marked, you could be driving down a road and there's a sign that's like beautiful blue geyser, and then that sounds interesting, so you just go there. Or you're driving down a road and it's like black sand beach this way 1 kilometer or something, and so you just go that way. So it's really easy to find new things to do or just follow a path that you had already planned because the roads are so well marked, and that is awesome. Kudos to people in New Zealand for having great infrastructure and signs and stuff like that, because it's so good, so easy to follow, impossible to get lost. The fourth worst thing about driving in New Zealand is the fact that the weather can be so spontaneous and the rainfall can be really heavy, and sometimes there's a lot of fog, and that can be hard on some of the roads because the roads tend to be more narrow and windy when you're driving through the countryside or the mountains, and it makes it pretty hard during a road trip. Sometimes you just have to pull over, or it also makes it difficult to see the beautiful scenery. So a lot of times you'd be driving through a mountain range or a valley and it's so cloudy that you can't even see the mountains, or it's so foggy you can't even see like a couple meters ahead of you, that type of thing. So that obviously doesn't happen. It depends on the weather, but the weather can be very spontaneous, so that can kind of put a damper on certain days and activities that you have planned. But that's a great thing about road trips, is that you can have more flexibility in your plans. Like if it's raining and you can't do what you had planned to do, you can just do something else. So that happened to us a lot along our trip. We would wake up some mornings and it would be so cold and rainy because we'd wake up in the van. Obviously, if we can't see any of the stuff surrounding us, we would just drive on to the next place. And sometimes you can just drive out of the rainstorm. But you do need to have a flexible schedule and a flexible mindset so that you don't get sad when that type of thing happens, because you can't control the weather. And that brings me to my fifth best thing about a New Zealand road trip, and that is you have the complete freedom to do whatever you want, go wherever you want, at whatever time that you want. So a road trip is really great because you can do everything at your own pace. You can decide to do a bunch of things, or you can decide just to do the main things that you want to do, and if you decide something at the beginning, you can change your mind along the way. There's nothing set in stone, so you can really just do whatever you want, which is awesome. To me, that's the best kind of vacation or trip because you're not following any itinerary, you're just doing what seems cool to you. You're just following your own pace, which I think is really what you should be doing when you travel. The fifth worst thing about driving in New Zealand for our road trip is that sometimes the people on the road are either bad drivers or they tailgate you because they think you're going too slow or they're going too slow. That's kind of the flip side of the doing things at your own pace, because there's so many people that come to New Zealand with the same mindset as you, that they'll just come and do things at their own pace. But sometimes that means if they're a bad driver, they're unfamiliar with the roads, that means they'll be driving really, really slowly and holding up traffic. If that happens, you would hope that they have the courtesy to pull over so you can pass them, but you can also just pass them on your own. They have a lot of slow vehicle bays, and that's typically for slow cars to just pull over so the rest of the people can pass them. But you will see a lot of cars that are really slow drivers with a lot of other cars backed up behind them, and that's just really inconvenient. And on the flip side, you'll see a lot of cars too that speed way, way, way over the speed limit. Like 100 kilometers per hour is the speed limit maximum for like everywhere in the country, but you'll see cars that are zipping way faster than that on these like narrow roads, which that could also be scary. So as much as you should take the freedom to drive at your own pace, obviously be courteous of other drivers and do be careful of other drivers, because even if you're a safe driver, that does not mean that everyone else is always a safe driver too. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. I hope that it was interesting. I am also going to upload a video with tips about things to think about before going on a New Zealand road trip. And we did the South Island part of our trip with Juicy vans. We had a Juicy Cabana, which was like this minivan that converts into a bed in the back seat. So I will also be uploading a video about that in case you're wondering like what kind of car to travel around in and stuff like that. And if you have any questions or want to see any other videos, please leave that in the comments below. And if you like them, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos. And I'll see you guys in my next one. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the world. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye!